Welcome, everyone, to Authors Bantering, the weekly podcast where myself and Ian Rogers discuss writing topics. This week's going to be kind of a fun one. It's all about workspaces and kind of the ideal, I suppose, writing environment. Going into this week, though, I was a little bit hesitant to talk about it just because I think for a lot of people it's very, very personal, their writing space. I can say what works for me, but ultimately I do think this is simply a trial and error thing. I think it's something where you'll figure out on your own what works for you and what doesn't. For myself, it tends to be very quiet. You guys see my workspace every day, every day basically. My office is basically like an attic loft. That's what it is, and it's quiet, and I love it. For me, that's what I need. I need quiet, I need solitude. A cafe is like the most awful idea in the world for me to write. The few times I have to travel and do it in cafes, it's the worst. I tend to take the Joyce Carol Oates mentality of the most detrimental thing a writer can face is distraction. Like it's not a lack of skill or a lack of prose or anything, or lack of ability. It's simply you being distracted. Your thoughts don't have time to kind of play around in your head. You're getting constant distractions by the outside world. That's what's going to sink you as a writer. That's what will sink a good session right there. Is it'll take it from a really potentially good session to a bad one really quick. At least for myself, if I am distracted. So for myself, seclusion with no access to the internet is what I need. But I'd be curious, Ian, though, do you kind of follow the same way, or?
I do. I think
Yeah.
the free from distractions is definitely numero uno. It's I couldn't imagine writing in a place where there was any kind of distractions, be it from strangers or like other people coming in, or an open place where there's something going on, a TV, or certainly cell phone messages, or
Yeah, that's the worst.
or computer notifications or anything like that. So that's my number one. My number two is a place that feels comfortable. And when I say comfortable, I mean a place that feels familiar, a place where, I'm in a chair that I've sat in before. I'm at a desk that I've sat in before. The shape of the room, the things on the walls, the tools on the desk are
Okay.
very familiar to me, and I've, just by nature of moving around a lot and having different workspaces, I've had a lot of different types of spaces. But one thing that they've all had in common is that I've tried to make them very, very consistent.
Okay.
Always, sitting in the same chair, facing the same direction, having the same things organized in the same in the same way. And this might sound really, really small, but it makes the space more familiar so that I can associate that space with working and with writing specifically.
Yes, exactly.
And so when people talk about, going to a writing retreat and, like having like a cabin or a room to stay in, something like that, sure, writing retreats sound pretty cool, but the idea of sitting at a strange desk at a room with strange furniture or like pictures on the walls that weren't mine is like kind of terrifying to me, actually,
Oh, okay.
because it won't have that familiarity to it that I've really, really grown used to.
hmm So you're kind of the opposite of Truman Capote, right? Who could only ever write in hotel rooms. You can't do
Yes.
like you got to
Yes. Yes.
basically
Yes.
you got to like have your own space. And I think that's probably true for myself as well. Yeah, it's got to be kind of that environment, right? It's got to be the thing that you set up. I tend to agree with that. Like, I didn't really think familiarity ever mattered, but it's a good point. I've never put out some really good, great prose when I've been traveling. No, honestly, no. The only exception to that, and I suppose we can kind of segue a bit into this, is if I'm in a writing environment. What I mean by that is like when I was going for my MFA. That was in a hotel room. I basically was in a hotel for a week with other authors, and yeah, some of the best prose I ever wrote came out of that. It came up because I was surrounded in a secluded environment for
Mm,
basically a week with other authors, and yes, like being surrounded by other authors, listening to other people's stories and their works, listening to professors,
mm,
that informs a lot of your skill. Like that, being in like that bubble of an area, your skill will go up. like just by osmosis, your skill will definitely go up during that week. You will feel a sense of inspiration. So I agree with you.
So that's interesting to me, actually. So you were around these other authors, but were they literally there in the room when you were writing, or were you
No,
seeing them during your non-writing time?
non-writing time, yeah. So after
Nice.
workshops were done, after critique groups were done, after listening to like professor readings, like
Yes.
when I was in my hotel room by myself, I was like so inspired. Or I'd be down like in
Yes.
the lobby, or I'd be in the library, basically like in these nice little sofas, these comfortable little like leather sofas here. Yeah, writing it out, right? And yes, I think scenery tends to play a big factor as well. Now we discussed this, right? Because this was up like in like the White Mountains in New Hampshire, right? So this beautiful landscape and scenery, nice quiet, this old hotel looks like The Shining or something like that. You know what I mean? Like something like that. It gives you. I think that atmosphere does definitely influence writing. I think if you went there into that kind of environment, I think after like that week, you will have put out at least some decent prose, like some, even if you were going through a writer's block, I think you would probably be able to figure it out just because you're around other authors. And there's a weird thing that happens. Like I can't really explain it. I don't know why that is, but just listening to people talk about writing and being in that environment, like basically exposed to it almost, it's not 24 hours a day, but like for a long period of time throughout a day, I think that does play a huge factor in boosting up skill. If I had a magic wand, I probably would have that every single day, to be honest.
Well, I like that.
Yeah.
I like that story a lot. I like it for a few reasons. I think it really, really illustrates the importance of less of the perfect workspace, but more of the ideal environment in the people
Yes.
that you are around when you're not actually putting pen to paper or
Mm-hmm.
typing on the computer. The idea that you can have your solo isolated space, do the work, and then leave that space and then go and interact with writers, have that osmosis kind of experience, talk to them about writing,
Yeah.
be stimulated, not, leave your writing space and go and watch TV or go and, deal with people who
Yeah.
don't know anything about writing or go and do something totally different.
Yeah.
It's the idea that you can have mental stimulation from other writers, but then also have a focused workspace together, and that those two things can contribute to make building a stronger whole. I think that's really, really important.
Absolutely. And it's not like you can try and replicate it on your own, right? You could like listen to like like audio tapes of people doing readings of their works and all stuff. You can read books and all stuff and find something, but there is something about being in a place where everybody is working on a project that inspires you yourself. Like it's weird, like because there's no other time in life, right? When you I guarantee you don't probably don't have all family members that are working on writing projects. You don't have friends that are all working writing projects. You can't just like sit down at like a chow hall or like a meal room or dining room basically and talk about different things with people, right? It's a pretty rare experience. So I think if you can try and get a workspace or a bubble or something that has some, I suppose, some cohesion, right? That has something where there are others that are also working on projects. I think it will affect you. It will push you, I think, a little bit
Yes.
further. It'll activate something in your brain that will have you put out a little bit better content. And again, it's
Yes.
hard to it's hard to replicate. It really is. But that's also why people pay $25,000 to do an MFA program, right? That's why they do it, because you can't get it anywhere else. Like you can't. It's hard to find an environment basically like that. Like it's hard to meet other writers and do that, for basically 2 years where you're just meeting and just cohabitating basically with other authors and picking their brains and sort of picking up some things just again by osmosis to working with them.
I'm glad you brought up MFA programs, actually, because I think that's probably the best example of an easy way, not easy, but a common or accessible is the wrong word, but a way that a writer can find that kind of community in a set space.
Yes.
The idea that the MFA makes that kind of experience available to people who, can pay for it, can enroll, get accepted,
Yeah.
what have you. I will say that I think there's other ways as well. There's plenty of other writing communities.
Mm-hmm.
People can, develop networks of writers and so on. There's different conferences and things like that. But as far as making that community available to somebody who maybe had never been in that kind of
Yep.
community before, I think MFAs can provide a really, really good step.
Absolutely. Absolutely, it is. I mean, and that's the thing, and that's probably the most important thing in a workspace. Ideally, like in your ideal workspace, is having the time and seclusion, but also surrounding, I think in a broader aspect, making your workspace, thinking beyond just your office, right? So thinking beyond just my workspace is my office, it's my desk, it's my computer. No, think beyond that. Like, bring people into your life that are also working on projects. Be more connected to the writing community. Have a deeper tie to things than just compartmentalizing your life in a way where this office is just my writing space. Because when you do that, it strengthens your work. I think it will strengthen things. And again, I can only say it from having seen it on both sides of it, but coming out the other end of it, it's important. Having that community is awesome, and having those interactions is fantastic. And if I kind of kept my thinking to just, all right, I'm typing at the computer, this is just my office, and didn't have anything beyond that, I don't know if any workspace can ever really replicate then the potential of what it could be. Yes, quiet solitude is great, but could you, if you can think beyond just having a workspace, I think you will be able to put out much, much better prose overall. Even, and you know, it comes down to what that matters to you, right? Maybe it's only 5%. Maybe if you just keep things to just, you know, your office, and you have your writing time, that's it, right? That's all your workspace, quote unquote, is. Okay. Versus the person that does that, but is also interactive with other authors online, in person, local communities, doing library reads, you know, does maybe an MFA program, does something else, right? Yeah, I guarantee the second person, your prose will probably be a little bit stronger. It's probably going to end up being maybe just a percentage point, right? Maybe prose ends up being 5% better overall, right? 10%, 15% because of that. Is it worth that to you? You know, the sacrifice that you're going to make for it. But thinking beyond just having an office at your workspace, I think is huge. And if, because
So what you're saying,
yeah,
I like it a lot. I think it speaks really, really well to this idea of the trap that some writers can fall into of being too isolated, of
yes,
just working with their own stories, with their own work, with their own, you know, maybe very small network, or, you know, the few authors that they're following, or whatever it is.
mm-hmm.
The trap of becoming too isolated there. I think that writers who are in that position, I definitely agree, should take steps to get out more and develop, you know, writing
Yeah,
communities where they can exchange ideas and get the kind of development that you're talking about. I will say though that there is a kind of, you know, cheribidis to the scilia, you know, the idea that the opposite extreme can also happen. If somebody, and again, I went to grad school with a lot of people who fell into this trap, who would become so enmeshed in the writing community, or so infatuated with the writing community, or wanted to perform for the writing community or interact with the writing community, that community became more important than the writing itself. So they were
yes,
maybe talking to a lot of writers, going to a lot of readings, talking the big game about all this stuff. But at the end of the day, they weren't producing pages. They
yes,
weren't bringing new chapters into workshop. And if they were maybe, you know, still needed some work, or needed, you know, more time needed to be spent there.
yep,
And it's the idea that if you find yourself in that opposite kind of position where you are devoting too much time to a
mm-hmm.
writing community, again, that trap is very, very real. You might owe it to yourself to step away and get more of that isolation.
Yep. I think
Really, really sit down and do more of the work.
absolutely. And I mean, me and you were in a critique group at one point that I ended up leaving for that exact reason, right? I was so involved with it that I needed more time away to focus on the writing, right? I was getting so involved, you know, within the additional projects of that, with looking at people's work, with working on like feedback and taking it, that I didn't have time to really sit in that seclusion and work. So you're exactly right. And so it definitely is a balance. It's a balancing act to try and figure out, okay, how much should I be involved with other people, and how much should I have my workspace be, you know, secluded. But I think if you can keep it to where you have your time for deep work, that seclusion, that quiet for deep work, but also spend your outside time focusing more on making that productive towards your writing by being interactive with communities, I think overall you're going to get up much further than if you just simply are secluded, or just at the
Yes.
extreme end of just, hey, I'm involved in every single writing group, critique group, I, you know, library read as possible. I love being involved in it, but yeah, I haven't produced, you know, anything more than a chapter or two in the past 6 months. Which
Yes.
one of my critique groups, that happens. I have a woman very, very brilliant. That's what she's done in 6 months. She's put out, I think, 2 chapters. Yeah.
And there's a lot of reasons why writers might not be producing. I think
Yeah.
a myriad of reasons. I think that becoming too engrossed in a writing community, or seeing a critique group as an ends in itself,
Yep.
is just one of those common pitfalls. So I think, just to kind of sum this up, it's this idea that you know there's a lot of extremes that writers can fall into,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that every writer should look at themselves, look at their own weaknesses, and say,
Yeah.
okay, am I erring too far on the isolation side, or too far on the engrossed in the community side, and kind of
Yes.
go from there.
Absolutely. But so with that, I think we've talked at least enough about the subject. I feel like we went off the rails a little bit here, but it's
That's
important to
fine.
think beyond that. Yeah, well,
It's
that's the
authors
thing.
bantering.
Yeah, it's called bantering, right? But I think it's also important to think beyond just having the stationary environment, to think of workspaces beyond that, to be a bit more fluid in your thought. And again, maybe I'm being a little bit hippie-ish about it, but I think you need to think
That's
beyond
fine.
just the four walls of your office in terms of workspace, and start to view the greater community basically that you could have as part of that as well, as part of the same thing, this very yin yang thing of not just putting out content, but taking in content as well, right? Going to the well, kind of replenishing the well by doing more reading, by listening to other authors, interacting. You're replenishing that creative well, rather than just simply sitting at the desk and drawing from it as you put onto the page. But with that, we wrap this up here. This is Ian M. Rogers. This is Josh Breslin, and this is Authors Bantering. We will be back next week, and if you enjoyed this, please make sure to like, share, and subscribe. See you next
Take it
week.
easy.